Come, all you blades, what matter yet? And you shall hear a tale of what befell. Poor Billy White, he died last night. He'd never died afore, for he did ate some ships yet brass, and he did fall down stiff, stone jet under the table of right toodaloo, right toodaloo.
What you've just heard is the only surviving fragment of a song called Come All You Blades, performed by Miss Rhoda Daughtry. The opening line reads, Come all you blades what's married, where you is the Black Country pronunciation of you, and blades is a 19th century term for a dashing young rogue of a man. It goes on to explain that a man named Billy White died mysteriously after eating some sheep's head broth, which for those who are unaware is sheep's head broth, a popular meal for black country folks at the time. That's all we know from what's recorded, but from other sources we do get an alternate version of the story. Billy, a collier by trade, falls in love with a pretty young girl named Molly, or sometimes Nellie Green. However, she is unimpressed by his attentions, as she was from a richer family who had been able to educate her very well, and she fancied that she was meant for a far better match. Rejected, Billy returns to his coal pit in despair, and sitting in the cold and dark, a figure approached him. Though he could not see him well by the lantern light, it was clear to Billy that this was Old Nick, the devil himself. Old Nick tells him that Molly needs to pay for her hubris, and so Billy needs to poison her with white arsenic. Though initially hesitant, his shame and humiliation, or perhaps just supernatural compulsion, drove him to poison a sheep's head broth and present it to her, whereby she falls stone dead under the table. That night, when Billy is asleep in bed, he is visited by a terrible spirit, taking the visage of a foul, decaying sheep. The spirit speaks, much to his horror.
A maid you have poisoned with my head. I come from Old Nick Straits. He wants you and will not wait. I'll tie you up in your red garters and carry you atop my hindquarters.
And with that, the spectral sheep and Billy vanished in a blinding plume of fire and soot that filled the street with the stench of sulphur, never to be seen again. Clearly, in the alternate version, it's immediately apparent the roles are reversed. Poor Billy the collier dies stone dead under the table from a poisoned sheep's head broth. Presumably, it is Molly, or perhaps Nellie in this tale, who is the poisoner. Though as we have no more to compare, we can only speculate on how far further this song may deviate from its alternate fellows. That's not the end of the story, though. And if you'll bear with me, maybe there's more we can find. Looking at this song, we have to investigate more about the source herself to properly understand the context for this particular version and if we have any hope of finding anything more. As such, I'm going to explore Miss Daughtry and her family connection to the area. Miss Daughtry was born Alice Rhoda Marsh on April 13th, 1883, in West Bromwich to mother Elizabeth and father John William. She was the youngest of 11 children. Only 9 have their names recorded to history, and only 4 or 5 of whom survived into adulthood. This was despite the family being in not the worst of situations for the period. For a time they owned and ran the Red Lion pub on All Saints' Way in West Bromwich between 1864 and 1873, which still stands, by the way. John was a relatively wealthy man. He owned the Hameworks blacksmith shop in Churchfield by the Ring o' Bells public house, as had his father before him. A hame is another name for a collar or harness worn by a horse. Next door to his shop was the Axle Works, and famously, in front of the Ring o' Bells up the street, was a horse impound. The blacksmith was never quiet in working hours. When there were not horses to attend to, John busied himself making chains. He was so busy in his occupation, in fact, that at one point he employed 10 others, 9 men and 1 woman. Women, it seems, were not an uncommon sight in blacksmith shops at the time, and would frequently work as assistants to the nailers. With all this context, maybe you'll be able to begin to see the long chain of events. The tale of Billy Vite appears to have originated at some point in music hall as a comedic piece. It captured the imaginations of the people of the time and began to spread, and as anyone with an interest in folk songs knows, that above all is a catalyst for change. Versions made it from London to Edinburgh, and even across the sea to New York and other states. And in the Black Country, they were no exception. The original author of the West Bromwich variant is unknown, but clearly they were altering the style from a comedy song to a more serious ballad. One day, when Rhoda's grandfather, William, was a small child playing in the yard of his father's hameworks, he could hear singing coming from the smithy, and poking his head around, he saw the young girls making nails, singing this song as they worked, each line deliberate and timed, leaving a pause for dramatic effect. William eventually taught this song to his son, John, who was Rhoda's father. It's uncertain how Rhoda came to know it, however, for her father died before the 1891 census. As such, the oldest she could have been at the time was 8 years old. Alternatively, perhaps, John taught it to Rhoda's mother Elizabeth, who in turn passed it on. Regardless, the tune, or at least a part of it, stayed with her all her life. After that point, the family moved to Wolverhampton, and Rhoda worked as an assistant to her mother until October 1910, when she married a Sheffield mechanic boarding in the area, Latimer Ridley Cromwell Daughtry, when she was 27. Little is known as to the nature of their marriage. However, it seems that they never had any children of their own, and in records dating to 1939, Miss Daughtry considered herself divorced. At some point in the early 60s, Miss Daughtry came to the attention of John Raven, a young Staffordshire folklorist who was in the process of building the Wolverhampton Folk Song Club, and Mr. Roy Palmer, a fellow folklorist undertaking to record folk songs for the purposes of preservation, much like Peter Kennedy had done for the famous Harry Cox of Norfolk. It was them who recorded the clip you heard at the start of the video, which is now held in the Birmingham and British Libraries. There's some ambiguity here. John recalls the song being collected in 1964 and Roy on the 9th of April 1966, according to the archive entry. However, records state that Miss Daughtry unfortunately passed away on the 22nd of January 1963 at Penderford in Tettenhall. So they're either both mistaken, recalling the dates of submission to the archives, or they had a very well-tuned spirit box, which, in fairness, would account for the static and distortion on the recording. You may remember I mentioned alternate versions to help complete the picture. But how were these found? The answer is simple but will require a brief explanation of folk song indexes. The two most common are Child and Roud. All you need to know is that a child number is given to each of the 305 ballads collected by Francis Child in the late 19th century, whereas a Roud number references 25,000 English language folk songs and was compiled by Steve Roud. The website of the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library allows for a search of this index by Roud number, but more importantly by the first line of the song in question. Using this, and the fragment of the first verse led me to a hit, Roud number 12992. Searching this number reveals every song indexed as close enough to share it. Variations from London, Edinburgh, Philadelphia and Connecticut, USA, and most importantly, our Staffordshire fragment recorded by John and Roy, also with the incorrect dates. It's these alternate versions that tell us what the outline of the story for the Staffordshire version would have been, though some switch the names and use alternate tunes. The version of the story I retold at the beginning is from Davidson's Universal Melodist, and yet another can be found in Weep Some More, My Lady by Spaeth. One man who seemed to have an unshakable conviction to complete this song was the man who helped to collect it, John Raven. John took the fragment to the Wolverhampton Folk Song Club and along with the other local tunes he'd recorded or reconstructed in their entirety, published it in the first of 3 volumes, Folklore and Songs of the Black Country and the West Midlands, published in 1965 privately from donations from the club's members. This series is no longer commercially available, and due to its limited run is almost impossible to find. If you want to read it, you will need to seek it in the archives of the Staffordshire Library Service. One may think that making the song publicly available in this way would be the end of it. Not so, for John republished this song multiple times, in The Book of the Black Country, as well as The Urban and Industrial Songs of the Black Country and Birmingham. Not only this, he performed it on an album he released with his brother Michael and Cannock folk singer Gene Ward. Later, he made the song and the story of how Rhoda came to know it part of his regular act in the Black Country Night Out.
You can have a brief rest in the singing now while I do a very short song that has no chorus to it. In fact, it has only one very short verse, and the fragment was obtained by a lady friend of mine, Miss Rhoda Daughtry from Penderford in Tettenhall, who got it from her grandfather, who used to own and keep the Ring of Bells blacksmith shop in West Bromwich, or the blacksmith shop near the Ring of Bells in West Bromwich. And he heard the girls who were working in the shop singing it, and she learned it eventually from her father, who got it from his, and so forth. And it's a very short fragment. If you know any more of it, rush up when I come off and tell me what the rest of it is. There is a sort of full-length Cockney version of the song, but we want to find the other words that belong to the Black Country version. It's called Come All Yow Blades, What's Marry Ed. Very strange little piece. Come all yow blades, what's marry Ed, and yow should hear a tale of what'n befell. Poor Jimmy White, he died last night. He'd never died a forward, for he did hate some ships near the brow, and he did fall stiff Stockstone Jed under the table out. Right to-la-roo-la-roo, right to-la-roo.
It's only because of his persistence in publishing it and singing it that I took notice, and only because of the notes he left across his work I have been able to find out as much as I have. Also of note is that while John never completed the song, he did find another local variation, called the Oldbury Chant. This version shares much in common with its cousins, and doesn't provide any additional clues to Come All You Blades. John was determined that if anyone lived who knew more of this song, he would do his best to find it. Sadly, John passed away in 2015 with this task incomplete. That said, John was very much a child of the 20th century, and I don't think he'd ever made an appeal to the internet before. Miss Daughtry heard the song in 1891, or previous, and she lived until 1963. So it is very unlikely that anyone of a younger generation still alive today will know anything more, particularly if that person never came into contact with John. Unlikely, but not impossible. So here I am making an appeal. Do you know more of this version of the song? Do you have elderly relatives who lived for a time in West Bromwich or the wider Black Country area? If so, show them the clip from the opening of this video and see if it jogs their memory. Do you have access to old notes or songbooks which might hold any clue at all? If you can help in any way, please contact me. Or even better, contact the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library and the Black Country Society, who I'm sure will be beyond grateful. It may already be too late, but if there is a last chance, it's now. So please, share this video with anyone you know who might be able to help. And if you can like, comment and subscribe, any interaction this video gets will push it up in the ratings and increases the chance of it being seen by someone who might know more.